Hello friends, I won't take much of your time. I just ask you to subscribe to the channel and like this video. Thank you.
My parents told me they'd catch the replay, so I made damn sure the camera caught what they'd regret missing for the rest of their lives. Graduation day. I stood backstage with the weight of a 4-year degree clinging to my shoulders, like wet laundry and the flutter of something sharp and electric behind my ribs. People talk about butterflies, but mine weren't delicate. Mine felt like hornets. I had a speech to give, a scholarship to claim, and a name to drag straight through the spotlight. And yet, what I couldn't stop thinking about, what kept looping in my head, was the text my mother sent the night before. "Sorry, kiddo, we can't make it. Dad's working overtime and I have that luncheon with the guild. We'll catch the replay. So proud. So proud." I almost laughed when I read it. But not the kind of laugh that reaches your eyes, the kind that stays low in your throat, bitter and quiet. I stared at that message, the words glowing on my cracked phone screen, and I didn't even bother to reply. Because this wasn't the first time they'd skipped out on something important. It wasn't even the 10th. I used to count, you know? I kept a little tally in my journal. School plays, science fairs, my first job interview, my first rejection letter, all the moments you're supposed to have someone in your corner telling you it's okay, telling you you're enough. I stopped counting around high school. Not because it didn't hurt anymore, but because I realized no one was going to show up but me. The thing is, I wasn't some troubled kid. I got straight A's, stayed out of trouble, didn't party, didn't make waves. I did what I was supposed to do. I took care of myself. I did my laundry, paid my bills, covered my textbooks by tutoring freshmen in coffee shops that didn't close until midnight. I went to class, then straight to the gas station job, then to the university library at 2 in the morning. I lived off instant noodles and other people's forgotten-to-go boxes. My friends called me the mule because I carried everything, bags, burdens, broken pieces, and never complained. But just because I didn't complain didn't mean I didn't feel it. It just meant I learned not to expect help. My mom liked to say she was raising a strong woman, but what she really meant was, I'm not lifting a damn finger. I grew up in a town where everyone knew your business before you did. My parents, Janice and Mark Bennett, were well-liked in that surface-level, polite-at-church kind of way. My mom was always perfectly put together, the type of woman who coordinated her lipstick with her Tupperware lids. She volunteered, organized fundraisers, took photos with the mayor during town events, always the smiling face in every local newsletter. My dad just went along with whatever she said, smiling when told, and speaking only when it wouldn't rock the boat. I used to think that if I became impressive enough, perfect enough, they'd finally look at me the way they looked at their friends' kids. But instead, the more I achieved, the more it seemed to irritate them. I remember the day I got accepted into my dream school. I was shaking, hands trembling as I opened the email. Full acceptance. Merit scholarship. I was screaming, sobbing, dancing around the kitchen. My mom glanced up from the stove and said, "Well, I hope you can afford it," like it was a challenge, when I told her about the work-study offer and the on-campus job I had lined up. She nodded like I'd told her I was getting my teeth cleaned. No hug, no celebration, no "I'm proud of you," just a shrug and a "make sure you call your Aunt Diane, she's got shingles again." So I stopped telling them things. That's when the secrecy started, not because I was hiding anything wrong, but because nothing good ever came out of their involvement. They didn't ask about my grades. They didn't ask about my mental health, but they sure showed up when it was time to take a picture for Facebook. "Our brilliant daughter, Matsata," my mom would caption it, then tell me to stand up straighter or "paita," try to look a little less tired. She loved the image of me, just not the work it took to keep me standing. By the time senior year rolled around, I had one goal left: finish strong, disappear quietly. But then came the email, a scholarship. Not just any scholarship, the National Future Scholars Grant. It covered everything: tuition, housing, books, food, travel stipends, job placement, mentorship, total value, $250,000. I sat there staring at the number, the comma, the zeros, and I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just breathed. Because this wasn't just money, it was vindication. I thought for half a second, maybe now they'd come. Maybe this would be the thing that made them show up. I sent the email to my mom, the official letter attached. I didn't hear back for 3 days. Then finally, "That's wonderful, sweetheart. We're so busy this week, but can't wait to watch the replay." The replay. That's when I knew. They weren't ever going to be the parents I needed. They were going to be spectators, not supporters. And spectators? Well, I had plans for them. Because if they wanted a show, I'd give them one they'd never forget. I started making quiet arrangements, contacted the media team at the university, made sure my speech wasn't just a generic thank you list, but something different, something personal. I began practicing in the mirror late at night, running lines between my shifts, tweaking the pauses, the timing, the punchlines. Ellie, my best friend and roommate, thought I was prepping for an audition. I guess I was, in a way. The day of graduation, I wore a dress I'd bought secondhand and heels that made my toes go numb. My hair was curled, my cap was straight, and tucked into the sleeve of my gown was a small envelope, one I planned to hold up high when I walked across the stage. I wasn't just walking for a diploma. I was walking for every ignored phone call, every "we're too busy," every "be grateful for what you have." My name was called. I stepped out into the light. The crowd blurred. The stage felt warmer than I expected. I held up the envelope, let the camera zoom in, let the world see. My hand didn't shake. My smile was calm. Because I wasn't nervous. I wasn't scared. I was ready. You don't grow up knowing you're unwanted. It comes in pieces, scattered across years and comments, and the way people look right through you when they're supposed to see you the most. I used to think I was the problem, that if I worked harder, smiled more, kept my voice soft, and my grades high, they'd finally look at me like I mattered. But some people aren't built to love without conditions. My mother was one of them, and by the time I figured that out, the damage had already woven itself into the way I walked, the way I spoke, the way I apologized before asking for anything at all. The first time I realized my mother measured me in usefulness rather than affection, I was 15. I had just come home with a first-place ribbon from the county science fair. I had spent weeks building a model of renewable energy turbines, staying up until 3 a.m. to solder wires and perfect my presentation board. I stood there, ribbon in hand, beaming, waiting for her to be proud of me. She barely looked up from her laptop when I walked into the kitchen. "Good," she said with a tight nod. "Just make sure you're not letting your math grades slip for this little hobby." It wasn't even a conversation. It was a drive-by dismissal. I remember standing there, still holding the ribbon, thinking maybe if I taped it to the refrigerator, she'd see it. The next day, she pulled it down and tossed it into the drawer where we kept takeout menus. Said it made the fridge look cluttered. When I tell people about my mother, they always want to know if she was cruel. No, not exactly. She was polished. She was polite in public, generous with neighbors, always the first to sign up to bring deviled eggs to the church potluck. But behind closed doors, love was transactional. You got it when you made her look good. You lost it the second you became inconvenient. My father, he wasn't mean either. He was just invisible, quiet, tired, always working, always nodding when my mother spoke, eyes somewhere else, as if tuning out life had become his full-time job. I learned not to rely on them for anything emotional. When I got my first period at school and came home in tears, my mother handed me a grocery bag of maxi pads without looking up from her phone. When I got dumped before prom and sat in bed crying, she knocked once and said, "No boy is worth puffy eyes." That was the extent of her maternal guidance, press-on platitudes and a wall of distance I could never climb. In high school, I started saving money in a shoebox under my bed. I took shifts at the local frozen yogurt shop and started tutoring in the evenings. I told my parents it was for extras, clothes, gas money, maybe a concert ticket here or there. What I didn't tell them was that I was planning my escape, not in some dramatic runaway fashion, but in quiet, calculated steps. I was going to get out, get away, go to college, and build a life they couldn't touch or control. The problem was, I didn't have much support, not financially or emotionally. So when I found out that the money I had saved, nearly $2,000 by the start of senior year, had been used to help remodel our kitchen, I broke a little in a way that didn't heal. I had left for school one morning, the money tucked in a white envelope marked books plus dorm stuff. When I came home, the envelope was gone. My mom told me casually over dinner, like she was commenting on the weather. "We needed to fix the counters before the fall inspection. Your father said you wouldn't mind." I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. I just sat there chewing a fork full of dried chicken while something inside me shriveled. That night, I opened a blank document and wrote out every dollar I'd ever spent on myself. I knew then that if I wanted to make it out, I was going to have to win my freedom with no help from anyone. College applications became my battleground. I applied to 12 schools and 27 scholarships. I wrote essays in the library until my fingers cramped. I researched deadlines, filled out forms, mailed packets, and followed up, all without a single offer of help. My mother glanced at my Common App once, declared it too wordy, and walked away. My father kept asking me if I really wanted to go so far from home. When I got my first acceptance letter, my mother's response was, "Don't get ahead of yourself. Tuition's no joke." Like I hadn't spent the last year budgeting down to the dime. Like I didn't already know what hunger felt like at the end of the week. When I finally got accepted to my top choice university, with a partial scholarship and a campus job waiting, I thought I'd feel elated. I didn't. I felt exhausted, like I had been holding my breath for years, and someone had just told me I had another mile to swim before I could breathe. I remember sitting on my childhood bed, the acceptance email open in front of me, and hearing my mom shout from downstairs, "Do not touch the thermostat. We're not made of money." In the end, I left home quietly. I didn't throw a fit. I didn't post about it online or write an emotional goodbye. I packed 2 duffel bags, took the train, and slept in my friend Ellie's dorm for the first week until my housing opened up. She knew. She had seen the cracks in me before I was brave enough to admit they were there. She never pushed, just let me crash on her beanbag, and offered me peanut butter sandwiches and awkward pats on the shoulder until I started laughing again. College was hard. I worked 2 jobs, took a full course load, and still found time to write for the school paper and organize tutoring sessions for kids in the community. I was burning the candle at both ends and then setting fire to the middle. But for the first time in my life, I felt like I was moving towards something instead of away from it. Then came the scholarship. The big one. The one that made all the others look like pocket change. When I got the email, I was sitting in the library, surrounded by empty coffee cups and highlighters with no ink. I read it 5 times before it sunk in. I had won. Full ride, room, board, travel, career mentorship, health coverage. $250,000. I could breathe. I could sleep. I could stop worrying about how I'd buy my next meal. I called my parents. No answer. I sent the letter in an email. My mother replied 3 days later. "That's wonderful, sweetheart. We're so busy this week, but can't wait to watch the replay." That was the moment the gratitude died. That was the moment I knew they weren't coming. Not for the ceremony, not for me. And they sure as hell weren't going to get the last word. Because I had a plan. And when I took that stage, they'd get their replay. Only it wouldn't be the one they expected. It would be a highlight reel of everything they chose to ignore, and one name they'd wish they never forgot. It didn't happen overnight. This decision to turn everything they ignored into something they couldn't forget. I didn't wake up one morning vowing to get even. That kind of fire doesn't come from one spark. It comes from years of low-burning embers, from silence that stretches too long, from the dull ache of being overlooked so often that eventually you start to disappear even in your own mirror. What happened to me was slow. It was quiet. And then one day, it wasn't anymore. By the start of my final year in college, I had stopped trying to reach for anyone's approval but my own. If a professor liked my work, that was great. If they didn't, I'd revise it. If I earned a win, I celebrated in silence. Maybe shared it with Ellie if we had a moment between class and the shared microwave in our off-campus apartment. We didn't throw parties or post flashy updates online. We survived. We strategized. We built our futures one busted printer and scholarship email at a time. But when I opened that scholarship offer, everything changed. $250,000. The number still looks surreal every time I stared at the confirmation letter. It was more than a scholarship. It was a fully funded launchpad into a life I had fought tooth and nail to build without any blueprints. It was security. It was validation. It was the sound of every slammed door being reopened on my own terms. And the first thing I thought, after the shock wore off, was that my parents were going to spin it like they had something to do with it, because that was their pattern. They were ghosts when it came to the work, the late nights, the breakdowns, the coffee-fueled essays at 4 a.m. But the moment a camera came out or someone else wanted to offer congratulations, suddenly my mother was front row, hair curled, lipstick matching her scarf, smiling like she'd pulled me out of the dirt herself. I remember when I made the dean's list for the first time. I had texted her the screenshot, cautiously, hoping, just this once, she might say something real. She didn't even respond to me directly. Instead, she posted a filtered photo of me from 3 summers ago with a caption that read, "My brilliant girl always knew she was destined for greatness." It got almost 100 likes. She didn't even tag me. That moment stuck with me more than I realized. Because when I read that scholarship letter, I didn't want to share it with her. I didn't want her fake praise, her performative excitement, her lukewarm pride that only showed up when other people were looking. I wanted her to know, truly know, that she hadn't earned the right to stand beside me. That everything I had, I built without her, brick by brick, scar by scar. So I started planning. Not in a vengeful, movie villain kind of way. I wasn't going to burn anything down, but I was going to shine a light on everything she worked so hard to ignore. I started by recording voice memos, short ones, just thoughts while walking home, or moments that hurt too much to carry alone. Things like, she called me ungrateful when I asked why she didn't come to my school play, or Dad nodded but never looked up from his plate, or they told me to stop being dramatic when I said I felt invisible. I didn't even know what I'd use them for, but I couldn't let those memories live only in my head anymore. I needed evidence, not for a courtroom, for myself. Then I started going through old photos and text threads, organizing them into folders labeled with phrases like gaslight classics and emotional drive-bys. Ellie caught me one night, scrolling through a message from my mom that said, "You always twist things to make me the villain," and raised an eyebrow. I told her, half joking, "I'm not documenting trauma, I'm storyboarding." Ellie didn't laugh, she just said, "If you're gonna tell it well." And that's when I realized I was going to do more than just walk across that stage. I was going to make a statement. Graduation wasn't going to be just a ceremony. It was going to be a reckoning. I reached out to the university media team under the pretense of updating my graduate profile for the commencement slideshow. I told them I had a unique story and asked if I could submit a pre-recorded message to be played after I accepted the scholarship. The team was overworked and underfunded, and when I offered to deliver it fully edited, they were all too happy to say yes. I crafted the message carefully, part speech, part documentary, part confession. I didn't name names, but the message was clear. Sometimes the people who raise you are just placeholders for the ones who will truly believe in you later. And sometimes the biggest victory isn't proving them wrong, it's proving yourself right. I laid out my story honestly, no dramatics, no sob story, just the truth. I spoke about working double shifts and crashing on couches. I spoke about rejection and resilience. I spoke about never having anyone clap for me unless I orchestrated it myself. And then I said something that stayed with me long after I recorded it. If you're watching this replay, just know I didn't need you in the audience to know I deserved to be here. But I made sure you'd see it anyway. The night before graduation, I didn't sleep. I paced. I drank too much coffee. I kept picturing my parents on their couch, maybe watching out of obligation, maybe not at all. My mom probably had her feet up, phone in one hand, maybe half listening, assuming I'd thank her in my speech like a good daughter. That's what she counted on, my silence, my polite compliance. But that girl was gone, the one who wanted to please her. She died sometime between the stolen savings and the ignored birthday. I pulled out the envelope, the one with the scholarship letter, and on the back of it, in thick black marker, I wrote one name, Janice Bennett. Not mom, not mother, just her name, plain and stark, like a label on something returned to sender. I didn't know exactly what I was going to say when I walked across that stage, but I knew this much. The camera would be rolling, the audience would be silent, and for the first time in my life, I wouldn't be speaking for applause. I'd be speaking for every version of myself that never got a replay. I woke up on the morning of graduation to the sound of birds outside my window, chirping like it was just another day, like the world hadn't been waiting for this moment right along with me. I sat up slowly, the weight of everything I had carried over the last 4 years pressing down on my chest like a second blanket. For a long minute, I just stared at the ceiling, thinking about how it had come to this, how this ordinary Tuesday would be the day I finally said everything I'd never been allowed to say. And not just to the crowd gathered in front of that wide, sun-drenched stage, but to the people who chose not to come. The ones who told me they'd catch the replay. I moved through the motions of getting ready like I was in some kind of trance. The dress I wore under my gown had been picked weeks ago, simple, clean, just formal enough to make my mother's voice whisper in the back of my mind. You could have worn something a little more flattering, couldn't you? I ignored her phantom commentary, focusing instead on getting my curls to stay in place and keeping my eyeliner from smudging. My fingers trembled a little as I pinned my cap into place. It wasn't nerves, it was adrenaline. Ellie met me at the door with coffee and a smirk that didn't quite hide her concern. She had been the only one who knew what I was about to do, and even she didn't know the full scope of it. I didn't want to rehearse it with her. I didn't want second guesses or soft suggestions about taking the high road. This wasn't about bitterness, it was about truth. I told her as much the night before, sitting cross-legged on the kitchen floor, both of us halfway through a cheap bottle of wine, while she kept saying, "Just don't torch the whole thing, Alyssa. You've worked too hard to lose the win in the fire." But that's the thing about fire. It doesn't just destroy. It clears space for new things to grow. And I wasn't going to let my story be the kind that tiptoed around the parts that hurt, just because they made someone else uncomfortable. The campus buzzed with energy as I walked toward the auditorium. Parents with cameras, graduates clutching bouquets, people laughing and crying and buzzing with the kind of nervous excitement that only happens when something real is ending and something else is about to begin. I felt strangely calm, detached almost, like I was moving through someone else's memory, waiting for my cue to snap into character. Backstage, the event coordinator handed me my cue card and checked the mic that would clip onto my gown. I could tell she was exhausted, probably juggling 6 tasks at once, and barely glanced at me when she said, "You'll step up right after Dean Hargrove announces the scholarship recipients. Keep it under 4 minutes." I nodded silently, the words already cemented in my head. The envelope with my mother's name scrawled on the back was tucked tightly into the pocket of my robe, its edges slightly bent from being held and reheld all morning. The ceremony blurred together in flashes of color and applause. Dean Hargrove's voice droned through the air, the kind of practiced oration that makes you feel like you're sitting in a brochure. Names were called, medals handed out. The audience clapped in predictable waves. My eyes scanned the crowd without expecting to find anyone, but still, there was a flicker of pain when I didn't. I couldn't help it. There was a time when I would have given anything to see my parents in that sea of folding chairs, clapping and smiling like proud parents should. But that hope had died years ago, and all that was left now was something sharper, something ready. "And now," Dean Hargrove said, smiling toward the podium like he had just remembered the main event, "we'd like to honor this year's recipient of the National Future Scholars Grant. Please welcome Alyssa Bennett to the stage." The applause rose like a wave and then fell into silence as I walked out under the bright lights, every step deliberate, My heart beat loud but steady. I could feel the heat of the stage lights, could hear my own breath in the tiny microphone. I stood tall, held the envelope high for the camera as planned, letting the lens linger on the bold, block letters written across the back. Janice Bennett. I saw a few eyebrows raise. One of the camera operators glanced toward the production booth, probably wondering if this was supposed to happen. It was. I stepped up to the podium, adjusted the mic, and began. When I started college, I had 2 bags, 1 friend, and 0 backup plan. I didn't have a safety net, I didn't have parents who checked in, or a room back home I could crash in if things didn't work out. What I had was grit, caffeine, and an unhealthy addiction to the 24-hour library on the south side of campus. Laughter, hesitant but genuine, rippled through the crowd. I worked double shifts, I missed birthdays, I stretched $5 bills across 7 days, and somehow made it work. And I know I'm not the only one who had to claw their way here. I see you. I am you. I paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. But this scholarship, this moment, this isn't just about academics. This is about resilience, about building something brick by brick when all you've ever had are ruins. Some of us weren't handed opportunities. We had to steal moments between shifts and stitch together something that resembled a future. More applause. My throat tightened slightly, but I kept going. And while most people thank their families in moments like this, I want to thank the people who weren't there, because their absence forced me to stand on my own. Their silence taught me how to scream louder in my actions. And their doubt, well, that just made the victory taste a little sweeter. I glance at the camera now, letting my eyes lock with the lens. Somewhere, I imagine my mother sitting on the couch, wine glass in hand, watching this replay with a frozen smile. Or maybe not watching at all. But the message was for her either way. I was raised by absence, by dismissive shrugs, by the phrase, "Don't make everything about you." But today, I am making this about me, every moment, every win, every bruise I turned into a lesson. The crowd was fully silent now. No coughs, no shuffles, just breath held in collective suspense. And to the ones who said they'd catch the replay, this is your moment. I hope it's everything you were too busy to show up for. I stepped back from the mic slowly, the applause building like a tidal wave. It wasn't wild or frenzied, it was deep, full, earned. I didn't smile, not fully, I didn't bow or wave. I just stood there, letting the sound roll over me like armor. I had said what I came to say. I didn't name her, I didn't curse, but I told the truth. And that truth was going to live on in every replay, every whispered conversation, every shared video clip passed from phone to phone, in family group chats that still pretended things were picture perfect. As I walked off the stage, envelope still clutched in my hand, I didn't feel relief, I felt clarity. And somewhere underneath that was a calm, growing satisfaction. Because I had finally told the story they always tried to silence. And this time, they couldn't fast forward through a single word. 3 weeks passed after graduation, and in those 21 days, the world I had known began to tilt on its axis in a way I didn't fully expect. Not because I thought I'd walk away unnoticed, but because I had underestimated the reach of the truth when spoken aloud in front of a microphone, under bright lights, and directly into a lens that streamed it all to the corners of the internet, where silence can no longer keep its grip. At first, it started small, like a ripple in a puddle. One girl posted a clip of my speech on TikTok, mostly focused on the moment I raised the envelope, zooming in on the name written in black ink. Her caption reading, "She didn't thank her mom, she did this instead." Then came the shares, the duets, the comments from strangers saying things like, "I felt that in my bones," and "Tell me why I'm crying in my car," over someone else's graduation. By the end of the first week, the clip had over 4 million views. My inbox was a mess of press requests, outreach from scholarship foundations, podcasts, asking for interviews, and job offers that started with, "We were impressed by more than just your resume." But none of that compared to the moment my phone rang with a number I hadn't seen in months. It was my mother. I didn't answer. I didn't even consider it. Instead, I let the call go to voicemail, staring at the name on my screen with a steady kind of detachment, the same way you might stare at an old house you once lived in, remembering how small it felt compared to everything you've built since. When the notification popped up, I pressed play, not expecting to feel much, but the sound of her voice still hit in the center of my chest, like a slow echo from a place I used to live. She didn't start with a greeting. She started with a sigh, heavy and rehearsed, like she knew she had to perform, but couldn't quite stomach the audience anymore. "I saw what you did," she said, the pause after that sentence stretching long enough to sound like a threat, or maybe just disappointment worn thin. "How could you say those things about us, Alyssa? What will people think? The church, your cousins. Do you really want our entire family to be known for that performance?" It struck me then, not with sadness, but with the sharp edge of clarity, that even now, especially now, her concern was not about the words I spoke or the years I carried them in silence. Her worry was the performance, the perception, the social cost of being portrayed as anything less than perfect. It was never about my experience, never about the cracks in our foundation. It was about the veneer, the shine, the illusion of being the family that had it all together. I didn't return her call. I didn't need to. Instead, I took that voicemail and did something she never would have expected. I added it to the end of the video I had already posted, the full graduation speech, edited together with clips from my college years, voice memos layered over images of me studying alone in dorm rooms or falling asleep on the bus home from my night shift. I stitched her voice in at the very end, just after the credits. No commentary, no framing, just her words, raw and untouched. People heard it, they commented, they messaged. Some told me I was cruel. Others said it was brave. A few asked if I felt better now that the world saw what I went through. But the truth is, I didn't feel triumphant or vindicated in the way revenge fantasies often promise. I felt something quieter, something like peace. Because it wasn't about the viral views or the interviews or the way people now clapped when I entered a room. It was about finally being able to say, without shame or stutter, that I had survived being ignored. And I had done more than survive. I had transformed it. 2 weeks later, I received a letter. Not an email, not a DM, but a real letter, written on old stationery that smelled faintly of lavender and thyme. The envelope was addressed in careful cursive to Miss Alyssa Bennett, and the return address was a town I hadn't visited since I was 10. I opened it slowly, already suspecting who it might be from, though I couldn't quite believe she still knew where to find me. Inside was a 3-page letter from my grandmother, my mother's mother, a woman I hadn't spoken to in over a decade, not since some family falling out I had only overheard bits and pieces of during holidays. She had always seemed like a shadow at the edge of my childhood, someone my mother refused to talk about except with clipped words and clenched teeth. In the letter, she wrote, "You are not the first woman in this family who had to burn things down to feel the warmth. Your mother learned to survive the hard way, and in doing so, forgot how to love without fear. That is no excuse for what she did, or didn't do, but it is a map, if you choose to follow it." I read those words over and over, letting them settle like dust in my bones. It didn't make anything okay. It didn't undo the hurt. But it gave me a thread to follow, and maybe that was all any of us ever got in families like mine. Frayed threads tied slowly into knots that sometimes held and sometimes snapped. One morning, I walked by the house I grew up in. I hadn't planned to. I was in town for a friend's event, and something in me said, "Go past it, just once, just to see." I parked a block away and walked slowly, heart steady, not racing. The siding had been repainted. The front porch was cluttered with potted plants and wind chimes. Through the window, I saw them, my mother and father, sitting across from each other at the kitchen table, not speaking, just existing. My father stared at a paper. My mother sipped from a mug, probably with the same chamomile tea she used to drink every night. They looked exactly the same. And yet, they had never looked smaller. I didn't knock, I didn't wave, I didn't take a photo or pause for long. I just stood there for a moment, one last snapshot in a story that no longer needed their permission to be told. As I turned to leave, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not anger, not triumph, not even closure. Just the soft, weightless feeling of finally being free from the need to be seen by people who refused to see me. I had written my story. I had spoken it aloud. I had placed the final punctuation mark, not with bitterness, but with purpose. They said they'd catch the replay. I hope they did. Because that was the last performance they'll ever see me in.